Many times I'm asked what advice I would give to young photographers. I give myself the same advice on a daily basis. You have to perform your own visual signature. You cannot get any place imitating the work of the people that you admire. In order to have a visual signature, I believe it's important that the photographer wants one very badly. He or she must want their pictures to look different from everybody else's.
Hi there. Because Ralph Gibson speaks so eloquently about his process of achieving a visual signature, I thought it would be interesting to explore the subject through his work. What he means by a visual signature is that when we look at images made by an accomplished photographer, we can recognize their aesthetic, but also we're able to build a picture of who they are as a person. A good example is Robert Frank. Whether he was photographing in London, Wales, or in America, we can perceive the presence of Frank. It's not that he's mainly shooting in black and white or the subject matter is perhaps similar. One understands on an unconscious level that one is tapping into Frank's perception of the world.
If you look at the work of any great photographer, his or her work will have immediately a recognizable visual signature. You don't have to look at the byline of a Cartier-Bresson or a Robert Frank. You know it from across the parking lot. Now, how is this visual signature forged?
I first discovered Gibson's work in the 1980s when I bought these books, although they were published the decade before. The Somnambulis, Deja-vu and Days at Sea formed a trilogy. At the time of their release, they were considered to be groundbreaking. Gibson had managed to produce photographs that were visually impactful, but at the same time leave one feeling uneasy. They were minimalistic, highly abstracted, embraced high contrast and grain. But on top of this, they carried a charge that was difficult to pin down. The images rarely mean one particular thing in a literal sense. They operate as visual metaphors. His objects stand in for sensations, states of mind, and unconscious impulses. While this approach gives the images symbolic weight, he's not allowing the viewer to fix a meaning. He was influenced by the Surrealists and brought a dreamlike logic or dissociated logic to the pictures. If the viewer attempts to linearly unravel the message or meaning, it's almost impossible to find resolution, like being trapped in one of those repetitive dreams. This is a difficult thing for a photographer to achieve. Photographic magazines are full of superficially impressive abstractions, but they almost never carry a psychic charge. They're just clever, well-seen arrangements of elements. What Gibson has done is communicate a complex feeling. Let's just step back a bit and consider some of the events and influences that led up to him developing his photographic ideas. He was born in LA and his father worked in the film industry. He had been an assistant director on a number of Alfred Hitchcock films. So from the outside, it would have seemed that Gibson had it made.
So we're talking about a rather glamorous childhood. However, it came abruptly to an end by the time I was 13, 14, divorce, alcoholism, et cetera, et cetera. I failed high school, and by 16 there was not much future for me, so I was told to go into the United States Navy. And they sent me to photography school, and having failed high school, having failed my family, I promptly failed photography school. So I had reached my nadir by age 17. It was only uphill possible. So I wrote the captain a letter asking if I could be readmitted, and he said, of course, but there's going to be another course starts in 6 weeks, so you can clean the barracks latrine for the next 6 weeks. So I had a humble beginning in photography. However, I took it very seriously.
Gibson eventually got his act together and became serious about photography. He was assigned to a Navy survey vessel, and when he was at sea, he had abundant time on his hands. He literally worked and slept in his darkroom. Without much else to do, he perfected his printing skills, and he had no idea at that point how his competency in the darkroom would open important doors.
And while I was in art school, Dorothea Lange, the great photographer, documentarian, was looking for an assistant, and so I got the job immediately. During this period, Dorothea invited me to show her my work. And I did some of these early pictures here in this exhibition. And she said, "Oh, I see your problem, Raphael. You have no point of departure." I said, "That's true, Dorothea. What is a point of departure?" And she said, "Well, if you have your camera and you're going down to the drugstore to buy toothpaste, because you're directed, you have an objective, going to buy toothpaste, you might then intersect something worth photographing. But if you just walk around the street looking for something to shoot, you will never achieve very much." And so from this moment on, from 1970 until this morning, I am always working on a project with a specific point of departure.
The idea of a point of departure goes beyond just the look of a picture. It includes perceptual and conceptual ideas. Perception is a sensory understanding of the world, what it feels like, while the term conceptual refers to the understanding through abstraction and reasoning.
I'm going to go out today and perhaps we'll do some architecture, and I'll say to myself, is it the who or the what I'm photographing in this architecture? What is it I am looking for in this architecture? Every photograph that interests me has something, an infrastructure that creates the meaning of the photograph.
Another realization that he had was that his compositions often emphasize what's not in the frame. In this image, we get to see a hand and a walking stick, and then we begin to trace what's to the right of the frame. Maybe an older man leaning against the wall for support. This one's a little bit more sinister and could have been a throwback to the Hitchcock times. By not revealing the being attached to the hand, we begin to imagine the worst. For these photographs, he didn't want a static or neutral composition. He created visual tension by directing the information towards the edges of the frame. In terms of equipment, he used a Leica and almost never chose a wide-angle lens. He said, "They don't do anything except show everything." I've edited another set of clips that I think will shed light on his process and how he became more confident about his point of departure. From the outside, it always looks like everyone else has things worked out, as if they've arrived on the scene fully formed. It's almost always more convoluted, messy, and non-linear than that. By talking about a few images, he reveals how some important pieces of his puzzle came together.
In 1961, I was at San Francisco Art Institute, and I made this picture. And all I was thinking about was compressing those three figures to the right side of the frame. I was into journalism. I wanted to be a photojournalist in that period. And I didn't pay any attention to the arrows or any of the architecture, structure of the picture. I was interested in gesture. Years later, I moved to New York. I'm working out of the Magnum office as a photojournalist. I was 27 years old. I wanted to be that kind of photographer, and I'm walking across the street in 6th Avenue, and I see this beauty parlor, and I'm drawn towards it, and I couldn't help but photograph this. And in that instant, I knew I wasn't going to be a commercial photographer. So I started working in a much more surrealistic vein. I dropped out of Magnum. I was living at the Chelsea Hotel. 2 of my 3 Leicas were in pawn. I owed 9 months back rent. By this time, I am recontextualizing the nature and content of my photographs. And in so doing, I'm discovering there's additional content. I'm walking down the street and I see this fellow waiting for a signal with a stick. I realize that I had made that picture some years earlier. This is the intelligence of the eyeball. So I went on to work constantly subtracting from the image, looking for a more tighter, more compressed frame.
It's also interesting how life events and experiences can find their way into one's creative process. And it's useful to acknowledge how these positions evolved. When Gibson was 12 or 13, he would accompany his father to the studio during the making of the Hitchcock films. This was during the 40s and 50s, and he was fascinated by the carbon arc lamps, the way that they would burn light down onto the sets. It was a very hot, directional light that would produce a high contrast ratio. It suited the suspenseful mood of the Hitchcock movies. 15 years later, when he was producing these prints, he recognized how the studio visits in his early years influenced his ideas. His stark black and whites and deep shadows evolved as he was attempting to eliminate unwanted information from the frame. As soon as contrast is increased, the midtones become less important, and the image then shifts towards a minimalistic abstraction. In later times, he said that as his vision became more understandable, he became less dependent on high contrasts. So Gibson has created a visual signature by bringing a rigor to his practice. He clarifies his point of departure. He commits to a certain focal length and a certain level of contrast. And he maintains an attitude towards scale and proportion. He views the psychological component as being linked to what it means to approach a subject while maintaining these aspects. Just when you thought, oh, is that all it takes to produce a visual signature? Gibson also cultivated a sophisticated approach to the production and sequencing of his books. I'll end with some visuals from his Black trilogy and his thoughts on producing photo books. Hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time.
Bookmaking requires that one spend a lot of time looking at the same pictures over and over again as you reconfigure them. One way or another, every spread I make is for a specific, unique reason. Sometimes it's similar to previous spreads, sometimes it's completely original, unique. And something would transpire in between the 2 pages. And so the essential principle is that the sum will equal more than the total of its parts, hopefully.